Have you ever like stumbled across something, like a topic or an idea or something, and you're just like, that just feels wrong. Like there's like a something lurking just below the surface, where you really least expect it.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Well, that's kind of what we're looking at today.
Yeah.
We're going to be doing a deep dive into the world of organ trafficking.
Yes.
And it's this really unsettling possibility that it's actually happening here in the U.S.
Right here in America.
Yeah.
It's not just a movie.
Exactly. It's something real.
Yeah, so forget the movies.
Yeah, forget the Liam Neeson Taken type stuff. This is real life.
Yeah.
And the sources that we looked at were, we looked at real life cases.
Yeah.
We looked at the smattering of data that's actually out there, because there's not a lot.
Yeah, that's a real challenge.
And we even looked at some opinions from experts in the field.
Yeah.
And it paints a pretty disturbing picture of this hidden and potentially thriving illegal industry. Yeah. And that's what we really want to get to the bottom of today.
Absolutely.
We want to explore this uncomfortable truth and find out if this dark underbelly of organ trafficking is truly happening here in the U.S.
That's right.
And if it is, what does that mean? What are the implications?
Yes.
What do we need to be thinking about? So let's kind of get back to basics for just a second.
Yeah.
For anyone just tuning in, let get really clear on what exactly organ trafficking is.
So in essence, it's the illegal trade of human organs.
Okay.
But the really crucial distinction between organ trafficking and ethical organ donation is the element of exploitation.
Right.
So you're talking coercion, deception, or the abuse of someone's vulnerability for profit.
Got it.
So when you're talking about ethical donation, that's really rooted in informed consent.
Right.
Altruism.
Yeah.
And there's no financial gain involved whatsoever.
Right.
With trafficking, unfortunately, it just reduces human organs to commodities.
Right. It's a product.
It's a product to be bought and sold.
Yeah. So this isn't just like some problem, in some far off corner of the world, right? Like the global scale of this is pretty shocking.
It's alarming.
Yeah.
So the World Health Organization estimates that about 10% of all transplants worldwide might involve illegally obtained organs.
10%.
10%. Think about that for a second.
That's huge.
That's thousands of illegal transplants every single year.
Yeah.
Generating somewhere between $840 million and $1.7 billion.
Wow.
So this vast illicit market, it really underscores the desperation of people who need these organs.
Right.
But it also highlights the ruthlessness of the traffickers who are involved.
Right.
These are people that are turning life-saving organs into high-value commodities.
So of all the organs out there, which ones are we seeing the most of, being illegally trafficked?
So by far, the most commonly trafficked organ is the kidney.
Okay.
And that makes up about 75% of the illegal trade.
Wow.
Now, part of that's because a person can live a perfectly healthy life. Yeah.
With just one kidney.
Right.
But we also see trafficking in other really critical organs like the liver, the heart, and even corneas.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
So, the U.S. is like this beacon of medical advancement and technology.
You would think so.
Yeah.
Right.
But the fact that this is happening here,
Mm-hmm.
that's just so disturbing to me.
Yeah, it's unsettling.
Yeah, and from what we've seen, it seems like a lot of this happens in the shadows, right?
In the shadows.
Yeah.
So a lot of this is clandestine.
Mm-hmm.
It potentially involves networks that might actually intersect with certified medical professionals
Oh, wow.
and seemingly legitimate medical facilities.
Okay, so it's not like some back alley kind of
No,
situation.
these are not back alley surgeries. These are people that are potentially using the system to their advantage.
That's scary.
And because of that inherent secrecy, it makes it incredibly difficult to even uncover.
Right.
And a lack of widespread awareness, even within law enforcement.
Oh, well, creates an environment where traffickers can exploit the weaknesses in the system.
So if they're operating within, seemingly legitimate organizations and places, who are they targeting? Like, who's most at risk here?
It's a good question, and it's not an easy answer, but our sources pretty consistently pointed to the exploitation of marginalized individuals.
Okay.
So people living in poverty, homeless people, and people who are battling with addiction.
So people who are already vulnerable. Yeah.
And the traffickers know this, and they dangle these false promises.
Like what?
Like a quick infusion of cash relief from debt.
Oh, wow.
a supposed path to a better life
Yeah.
in order to lure them in.
Right. It's like a too good to be true kind of.
Exactly. And they exploit that vulnerability.
Yeah. And I imagine those promises rarely materialize, right?
Almost invariably, they don't.
Yeah.
So the really grim reality is that victims are typically left with severe health complications. They don't get the money they were promised. And they have a lifetime of physical and emotional scars.
Right.
And the secrecy that surrounds all of this is also a big problem because victims often face profound stigma,
Yeah, absolutely.
which prevents them from even coming forward due to fear, shame,
Or even retaliation.
right? Or the threat of violence.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's just a horrible situation all around.
It is.
So when we think about all this, the deception, the exploitation,
Yeah.
it really highlights the ethical abyss that we're looking at.
It's a slippery slope
Yeah, it is.
when you start to commodify a human being
Yeah,
for the purpose of profit.
right.
And it really strikes at the very core of our ethical principles as a society.
Right. It feels like a fundamental violation of just human dignity and autonomy.
It is.
Yeah.
These are individuals who are already in precarious situations.
Yeah.
And they're being further exploited in the most profound way.
And they're being lied to about, what's going to happen to them, too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, our sources mention that they're often fed these blatant lies, like, for instance, being told that a removed organ, like a kidney, will just simply grow back.
Which is ridiculous.
It's medically impossible.
Yeah.
But they prey on the fact that people are desperate and don't know better.
So it's not just about the transaction itself, right?
Right.
Like getting the organ, removing the organ.
Mm-hmm.
The consequences for these people are devastating and enduring.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That promised compensation that was the carrot that got them in the door almost never materializes.
Yeah.
And instead, they're often left with debilitating infections, chronic pain,
Wow.
and sometimes even complete organ failure.
And no recourse, right?
No recourse because it was an illegal activity to begin with.
They can't go to the authorities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we found a particularly heartbreaking example in our research.
Tell me about it.
There was a young woman in California who was promised $10,000 for her kidney.
$10,000.
$10,000.
Wow.
But she received nothing, and on top of that, she was left with really severe health issues that made it impossible for her to work.
Oh, my gosh.
So it really makes you question the safety net we have in place when these vulnerabilities can be so ruthlessly exploited.
Yeah, absolutely. So, beyond just the health consequences and the lies,
Mm-hmm.
our sources also talk about coercion
Right.
and fraudulent consent forms.
Oh, absolutely. So traffickers will frequently coerce victims into signing what appear to be legitimate consent forms,
Oh, wow.
or they'll outright deceive them
Yeah.
into believing that they are somehow related to the intended recipient of the organ.
Wow. So they're really...
They'll play on family ties,
Yeah.
or they'll just completely manufacture a relationship.
That's awful.
Because they know that hospitals will often prioritize family donors.
Yeah, of course.
And so they'll coach the victims on how to lie,
Oh, my God.
how to cheat the system.
Wow. And this is all done to bypass hospital regulations and oversight, to completely strip the victim of any ability to actually consent to what's happening to them.
Absolutely.
Wow. So we're really talking about the human body becoming a commodity here.
Yeah,
It's like organs are just products to be bought and sold for profit.
exactly. And that really puts financial gain over the inherent value of human life.
Right.
And it disproportionately impacts the poor
Yeah.
because they are often viewed as expendable in this horrible equation.
It's so disturbing.
Meanwhile, the wealthy recipients,
Yeah.
they might be paying exorbitant sums, sometimes upwards of $150,000 for a single kidney.
150,000
$150,000
for one kidney.
for one kidney. And that really highlights the profound inequality at play here.
It really does.
The ability to potentially buy your way to health
Mm-hmm.
at the direct expense of someone else's well-being.
It's just wrong.
It's a deeply troubling aspect of this.
So let's talk about the laws in place here in the U.S. Are they even equipped to deal with something like this?
I mean, that's the big question, right?
Yeah.
So the legal landscape is definitely intricate.
Okay.
And from what we've seen, it often falls short.
Oh, yeah.
The National Organ Transplant Act of 1984 does make it illegal to buy or sell organs
Okay.
for transplant within the U.S.
Good.
And there are penalties associated with that.
Okay.
But the enforcement of this law
Yeah.
appears to be inconsistent,
Oh.
and it faces significant hurdles.
Like what kinds of hurdles?
Well, for one thing, the U.S. Department of Justice primarily focuses its human trafficking efforts on cases involving sex and labor exploitation.
Okay.
And so they don't explicitly include organ removal in their definition of human trafficking.
So there's a loophole.
It creates a legal blind spot that traffickers can unfortunately exploit.
Wow. So there's not even really a clear definition of what this is
Right.
in the U.S.
And on the international stage, there's a broader understanding of what actually constitutes organ trafficking.
Okay. So what do they say?
So the Palermo Protocol, which is a key UN convention, specifically defines trafficking in persons for the purpose of organ removal
Okay.
as a form of human trafficking when it involves coercion, deception, or abuse of a person's vulnerability.
Got it.
But despite that recognition, the number of reported convictions globally is still surprisingly low.
Really?
Only 16 cases were reported to the UN Office on Drugs and Crime as of 2024.
Wow.
And, it wasn't until 2009 that we even had the first documented case in the U.S.
In the U.S.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
It involved a man in Brooklyn who was essentially brokering black market kidneys.
Wow.
He was buying them from vulnerable individuals in Israel and selling them to patients in the U.S.
In the U.S.
Yeah, and he was making a lot of money, sometimes as high as $160,000 per kidney.
160,000?
$160,000.
Wow.
So while this case was obviously a breakthrough,
Yes.
most experts believe it's just the tip of the iceberg.
Wow. So if even getting a conviction is this hard, are there other obstacles to prosecuting these crimes?
I mean, there are a lot of challenges that our sources highlighted.
Okay.
And first of all, the fact that there's no specific legislation directly targeting organ trafficking.
Oh, wow.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
And on top of that, there are very limited resources allocated to law enforcement for these types of investigations.
So we need more funding for law enforcement to actually tackle this?
Yes, and we need more specialized training
Right.
to help them understand the nuances of this crime.
And then there's the victims themselves, right?
Right.
They might be afraid to come forward.
Absolutely.
And a lot of this stuff is happening internationally.
It's international.
Yeah.
And so coordinating across borders is a huge challenge.
Yeah, makes sense.
And then fundamentally,
Yeah.
we just don't have enough data.
On organ trafficking.
On organ trafficking, specifically in the U.S.,
Right.
that makes it incredibly hard to come up with strategies to actually combat it.
All right. So if we don't know how bad it is, we don't know what to do about it.
Exactly.
So I think something that's really important to talk about is the impact that this has on society.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about the individual victims.
Right.
This whole thing really erodes the trust we have in our medical system.
Absolutely.
Because as someone who has to rely on the medical system,
Mhm.
it's really concerning to think that these ethical breaches could be happening.
It can deeply undermine public confidence in healthcare as a whole.
Exactly.
Because if organs can be bought and sold,
Yeah.
then what else is being compromised?
Right.
And when we see reports like the ones that came out in 2009
Yeah.
about the Brooklyn case and the allegations that some of those transplants were performed at Mount Sinai Hospital,
Yeah.
it raises serious questions about how robust the screening processes are
Right.
and the ethical oversight within medical institutions.
So this is all a symptom of this larger problem of inequality in access to healthcare.
Right. Absolutely. So while people with money might be able to use those illicit channels
Right.
or engage in what's known as transplant tourism.
Transplant tourism.
Transplant tourism.
What is that?
That's where people travel to other countries to purchase organs.
Wow.
So they're bypassing the system completely.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, individuals from poorer backgrounds are left with limited options.
Yeah.
They're on these already incredibly lengthy waiting lists.
Right. And, it's not just a waiting list. It's life or death for a lot of these people.
Absolutely.
And we saw that statistic from UNOS.
Yes. The United Network for Organ Sharing reported that over 4,500 people died in the U.S. in 2023 alone.
While waiting for a kidney.
While waiting for a kidney.
That's tragic.
It is a tragic disparity.
So are there any groups that are particularly vulnerable to being targeted?
Yeah, unfortunately, refugees, migrants, and individuals experiencing homelessness are often the prime targets for traffickers
Because they're desperate.
because they're desperate.
Yeah.
And they lack those legal protections.
And we saw that in the California case, right? Where they were
Yes.
preying on the homeless.
Absolutely. And they offered them basic necessities like cash and temporary shelter in exchange for a kidney.
Oh, my God.
And it's just a devastating illustration of this vulnerability.
So is the lack of public awareness a big part of why this is still happening?
It's a major factor.
Like people just don't know.
People don't know.
Yeah.
There's a common misconception that organ trafficking is something that only happens in far-off countries,
Right.
in less regulated parts of the world,
Yeah.
which allows it to remain hidden and unfortunately flourish right here in the U.S.
So raising public awareness is critical.
Critical,
Yeah.
both to prevent people from becoming victims
Yeah.
and to provide support to the survivors who face so much stigma.
So how do we do that? How do we raise public awareness?
Well, education is key.
Okay.
We need to be informing the public about the tactics that traffickers use and the serious long-term consequences of undergoing illegal organ removal.
Yeah.
And I think schools, community organizations, and healthcare providers can all play a role
And getting the word out.
in disseminating this information
Yeah.
and training staff to recognize the warning signs.
Like what kind of warning signs?
So unexplained surgical scars, for example,
Oh, wow.
or patients who appear fearful or under duress.
Right.
These are all red flags.
Yeah.
And the media has a huge role to play in this as well.
Absolutely.
You know, reporting that focuses on the human stories behind the statistics can help to humanize the issue and generate more support for action.
Yeah. I think that's so important. You know, because we can throw statistics around all day, but when you hear a real story,
Exactly.
it really hits home.
It hits home.
So to really kind of bring this home for everyone, let's dive into some of the specific cases that have happened here in the U.S.
Yeah.
Starting with that 2009 Brooklyn case.
Yeah, so as we mentioned, that was a landmark case. This individual ran an elaborate scheme for nearly a decade.
A decade.
A decade.
Wow.
And it included forging documents to make unrelated donors and recipients appear as family members.
Wow.
And that was all an attempt to circumvent hospital oversight.
Right.
And the fact that it went on for so long and was so complex strongly suggests that this wasn't just some isolated incident.
Right.
It's probably a small fraction of the actual illegal organ trade happening.
It's hard to even imagine the level of cruelty involved in something like that.
It is a lot to process.
And then we have the more recent case in California targeting the homeless population, which is just
gut-wrenching.
it's so disturbing.
It is, because they really preyed on that desperation.
Yeah.
Offering basic necessities like cash and shelter in exchange for a kidney.
It's just awful.
And the surgeries were reportedly performed in makeshift unsanitary conditions.
Oh, my gosh.
And then they just abandoned the victims.
Wow.
Often with severe and untreated health problems.
And then there are the international cases, right?
Yes.
Where people are actually trafficked into the U.S.
Into the U.S.
Yeah, tell me about those.
Well, so you have individuals who are lured from other countries with false promises of employment,
Right.
only to be forced into organ removal surgery
In the U.S.
in the U.S. in clandestine clinics.
Oh, my God.
And the fact that there was a raid in 2022
Yeah.
that uncovered one such operation suggests this is much more prevalent than we realize.
And people aren't surviving this, right?
Tragically, no, not all victims survive the procedures.
So how do we even begin to collect data on something like this?
I mean, that's the challenge, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
so hidden
Yeah.
that it's incredibly hard to get good data.
And the victims aren't coming forward.
Right. They're reluctant to come forward.
Yeah.
But if you look at the global estimates from the WHO,
Yeah.
they're saying thousands of illegal transplants are happening every year.
Wow.
And we know that the demand in the U.S. is really high.
Yeah.
Over 100,000 people were on the waiting list in 2023.
Wow. And that's just the legal waiting list?
That's just the legal waiting list.
Right.
So some experts are afraid that thousands of people might be trafficked into the U.S. every year
To meet that demand.
to meet that demand.
And there's a lot of money to be made, right?
Oh, the financial incentives are huge.
Yeah.
We're talking a single kidney can fetch anywhere from $50,000 to $150,000
On the black market.
on the black market.
Yeah.
And the victims, they might see less than 10% of that if they see anything at all.
Yeah. So the victims are seeing a tiny fraction
Tiny fraction.
of the profits.
Yes.
And a legal kidney transplant costs what, like $400,000?
About $442,500.
Wow.
So you can see why the black market thrives.
Yeah, so this lack of data really is a huge problem.
It's a big barrier to understanding the scope
Yeah.
of the issue.
So what are the experts saying about all of this?
So experts in the field paint a very grim picture. They emphasize that this is likely much more widespread and much more sophisticated than people think.
Okay.
For example, Dr. Monir Manarusaman from Michigan State University believes that organ trafficking is happening in almost every country,
Every country.
including the U.S.,
Wow.
and often involves very intricate and well-organized networks.
Wow.
And Cyril Gout from Interpol says that there's significant underreporting
Yeah.
because of the nature of the crime.
It's hidden.
It's hidden,
Yeah.
and there's a real lack of awareness among law enforcement
Okay.
and poor information sharing between medical and law enforcement communities.
Right, so they're not talking to each other.
They're not talking to each other.
Yeah, and that's a big part of the problem.
That's a big part of the problem.
And the fact that there haven't been that many prosecutions
Very few.
in the U.S. since 2009
Yeah.
really speaks to how difficult this is.
It shows the challenges in investigating these complex cases.
Right.
And there needs to be more specialized training for law enforcement.
So they know what to look for.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then there's the ethical dilemma for medical professionals, right?
Yeah.
They have to balance patient care
Mm-hmm.
with reporting potential trafficking.
And they're bound by confidentiality.
Exactly.
So it's a tough spot for them to be in.
So we need to find ways to allow doctors to report without fearing that they're breaking the law.
Right now, some experts are advocating for legal reforms that would do just that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's talk about the victims.
Yeah.
You know, what they go through emotionally and psychologically.
The toll that it takes on them is immense.
Yeah.
They often struggle with really severe anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder.
Wow.
And it makes rebuilding their lives so challenging.
Ah.
And as we heard in that story of the young woman, the psychological wounds can be just as deep as the physical ones.
Yeah.
It involves feelings of betrayal, distrust, guilt, and shame.
Wow.
And the lack of post-operative care just makes it even worse.
Yeah, absolutely. And financially, they must be devastated.
Oh, yeah.
They're often left with substantial medical bills
From a complication.
from the complications of the surgery.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they can't even go back to work
Because of their health.
because of their health.
Yeah, and that puts a huge strain on their families too, right?
Of course, because
Okay.
families become the caregivers.
Right?
And they experience their own grief, stress, and economic hardship.
So this is a problem that ripples outwards.
Absolutely. It impacts entire communities.
So I think hearing all of these stories
Mm-hmm.
and understanding the potential scope of this problem,
Yeah,
it really feels like a call to action.
it is.
We need to do something.
We do.
And I think first and foremost, we need to increase public awareness.
Awareness is key.
Yeah.
Because if people are aware of it, they can recognize the signs,
Yeah,
right? And they can get help or report it.
absolutely.
We also need to strengthen the laws
Yes, stronger laws.
and close those loopholes that traffickers exploit. Yeah. And then we need to make sure law enforcement has the resources to investigate and prosecute these cases.
Yes, more resources for law enforcement.
Yeah. And I think critically, we need to support the victims.
Yes. Support the victims,
Yeah.
give them access to medical care counseling and financial assistance to help them rebuild their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on a broader level, we need to do something about the demand.
The demand for organs.
Yeah.
That's the root of the problem.
So how do we address the demand?
Well, there are a few things we can do.
Okay.
One is to implement policies like presumed consent for organ donation.
Presumed consent.
Yeah, that means that you're assumed to consent to organ donation
Right.
unless you explicitly opt out.
Got it.
And that's proven to be really effective in other countries.
Interesting.
So expanding that policy in the U.S. could make a big difference.
Okay.
And we also need to have more public awareness campaigns to encourage altruistic donation
Right.
and invest in technologies for artificial organs.
Right. So we don't need human organs to meet the demand.
So we're not relying on this black market
Right.
to meet the demand.
Okay.
So it's a multifaceted problem.
It is.
And it requires a multifaceted solution.
Well, this has been a really eye-opening deep dive
It has been
into a hidden and troubling reality.
a very hidden reality.
Yeah. And I think the thing that really stuck with me is that organ trafficking in the U.S. is not just a fictional threat.
It's real.
It's a real problem.
It's happening right now as we speak.
Yeah.
It exploits vulnerable people for profit.
Yeah.
And there are huge ethical, legal, and social consequences.
That we can't ignore anymore.
We can't ignore it.
Yeah.
And the data might be hard to come by.
Right.
But the global estimates the real-life cases
Right.
And what the experts are saying all paint a very disturbing picture.
So what can we do about it? I mean, what can our listeners do?
That's the big question, right? So if you
I
think about the hidden nature of this and the vulnerability of the people being targeted, it really leaves us with a big question.
What's that?
How can we as a society be more vigilant in identifying and protecting the people who are most at risk?
That's a really important question.
It is?
I think it's one that all of us need to be thinking about.